think that at some point I would put makeup on for these things, but honestly, at this point in my life, honey, you're just going to get what you get. So, fans and fanatics of astrology, we have a very special post today. Those of you in the US know or should know, today they're holding a vote for whether witnesses will be called for this trial. This is a very important thing. And, ultimately, if you've been paying attention, we know that really what this comes down to is whether they're going to let John Bolton get up on stand under oath and tell the truth, and be cross-examined, right? So they're voting on whether they're going to allow that to happen. Now, the reason we're doing this post today about that is because we call this, astrology called this back on January 30th, 31st. I've got, I'll show you the post. In the Patreon page, not the video on YouTube, in the Patreon page, I specifically said that at this time, we should expect to see something significant happening. And I'll show you the thing when we get there. So I thought this was very interesting because so far everything's been running on time except for that one thing. But again, impeachment hearings are new for me. Everything else has been running on time as far as the analysis of the impeachment trial. So I'm really pleased about this. With that, also, we are going to be looking at today's aspects for the vote, which looks a little weird. It's a little hinky out there, like nothing else hasn't been, right? And also, we're going to look at Lamar Alexander's chart, he's the senator from Tennessee who's retiring this year. And he was originally going to vote to allow witnesses, and suddenly within the last 24 hours, he's changed his mind, interestingly enough. So we're going to look at his chart and see if we can get a sense of what might have happened. And also, we're going to discuss some of the limitations of astrology and what we can and can't expect to find in a chart, realistically. So, with that said, let's get started. Okay, so here we are looking at, this is a screenshot from a January 20th post. Sorry, it wasn't the 30th, the 20th, about the Senate trial. And this entire post is about the analysis of the trial astrologically, separate from the impeachment itself. Because the impeachment, the outcome has already been determined. We were literally just trying to see how this trial is going to play itself out. And in this post, it was specifically said, watch the trial 2 weeks into it, which would be the week of February 3rd, 2020, which is right now, for another major development. And what are we talking about? We're talking about whether they're going to let, basically, when it comes right down to it, John Bolton testify and any other witnesses that may prove to be extremely damaging to the efforts to bury this impeachment trial into the ground, never to see the light of day again. So here, what we are looking at is the actual post on the Patreon page. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it's just for the members, but there is a specific excerpt in here, and this is where we were talking about how this week would be particularly momentous in terms of the process of the impeachment trial. What we have here is the chart for the vote to allow witnesses occurring today starting at 1 p.m. What's interesting to note about this chart is that the moon is technically void of course. The only saving grace that we have is a part of fortune trining the moon, but other than that, the moon is void of course. And this was exactly what we had when the trial started, with a void of course moon. So again, these things are definitely have a strong correlation or affinity with each other. Now, when you look at void of course moons, typically what this means is that things are kind of hanging out in space. They're in limbo, spinning their wheels. They're not really doing anything. The other thing with void of course moons is that things don't always necessarily go according to plan. There's a whole lot of wibble wobble in the universe where these things are concerned. So there are some people who would say that a void of course is the equivalent of a Mercury retrograde, except it's a lot less predictable. But the other side of a void of course moon, and it operates differently, whether it's in a natal chart or an event chart, right? The other thing with a void of course moon is that there's a lot of divine activity and intervention in here as well. So sometimes those things not going according to plan are because there are other forces at work kind of skewing the playing field of reality here. Also too, with void of course moons, especially in event charts, it means there's just a whole lot of nothing, just a whole lot of ado about nothing. because everything has already been played out. So we're kind of in a spin cycle waiting for things to come to completion so we can start a brand new cycle. So this may suggest that the vote today has pretty much already been voted, and this is literally just a big show and performance while they're waiting for something else to kick in. Now, if that is the case, following that line of logic, the moon is moving into its first aspect, which would be a conjunction to Uranus. So there may be possibly, because this suggests it, there may very well be a waiting for the other shoe to drop. They may literally be kind of hanging out in limbo, not wanting to make a move because there's a sense or an actual knowledge that there is something even more explosive coming down the pike, and they're waiting to see if this pops up or it doesn't. So if it is something even more explosive, obviously it would make the need for a witness pointless, I suppose. Not completely sure what that's about, but we shall see. So things that I would look for today with this particular aspect is basically nothing, and everything's pretty much already a done deal. Well, at least as far as the people casting their votes are concerned. So regardless of what they're saying out and in public, their decision was made long before today. And for reasons and factors that you and I will definitely not be privy to, because that moon vote, of course, definitely hides things from view. Which now brings us to an interesting turn or twist in this ongoing drama, right? So there was a senator, they only need a couple of votes to get the vote in to allow witnesses. And this one particular senator was one of the few GOP members that was on board to allow witnesses. But within the last 24 hours, suddenly, surprise, he's changed his mind. And this is an actual copy of his official statement on Twitter about his thought processes with this, which is pretty interesting. There's obviously more here going on than meets the eye. Now, this senator is apparently getting ready to retire this year, so he's not going to be holding any kind of public office after this. And mind you, he's a millionaire. You should really take some time and go look at these senators and what their financial net worth is. So there's some quality of life issues occurring for this guy after he leaves office that are certainly of consideration. Now, one of the other things that's interesting about him is that he also made it very clear that while he did believe that the president did something wrong and completely inappropriate for the office, he also goes on to say, in some weird, bizarre logic, that you can't impeach a president for inappropriate behavior. And, this completely assumes that Clinton was not actually impeached for, inappropriate, sexual relations with a staffer in his office. So, having hundreds of people in a country getting murdered because you've denied them financial support that you promised them for military aid to protect them from a hostile government, this is considered, slap on the hand inappropriate, but, getting some McLovin stuff going on in the office, apparently that's even worse, because that we can impeach for, but this we can't. I don't even understand what they honestly believe we're that stupid. They do. So there's something to think about. So now, the other thing, so of course this is like, we're looking at this like, well, okay, well, who is this guy and what is this about? So the next thing we're looking at is his chart and today's vote, right? And what may have been leading up to it prior to today, the day before. So one of the things that we know is that he had a huge grand trine in force. That was operating with him and his chart. So this is, all that security and financial stability and stuff like that. So he's literally, I would imagine, highly focused on his quality of life after retirement. The other thing that was interesting, I thought, is that the transiting Mars was opposing his moon. Now, we don't know what his actual time of birth is, but we do know that moon is only going to be within a few degrees one way or the other. And at noon, setting up for a noon chart with an unknown birth time, that moon sits right smack in the middle of Gemini. So his moon is in Gemini no matter what. And that Mars, also right smack in the middle of Sagittarius, is going to be close enough to affect his moon one way or the other. So I'm wondering if that Mars was not putting a lot of pressure on him to change his mind. Now, the thing that's interesting about this, the moon in Gemini is known to change their minds on a dime. So it's entirely possible that even though he changed his mind and said he was going to vote against witnesses yesterday, that he may change his mind and vote for witnesses today. Not completely sure how that's going to work out, but it will definitely be interesting. So the question becomes now, how will this vote today play out? And that's a great question. So here's the thing with astrology that we should all understand. One, it's very difficult to predict specific outcomes for a number of reasons, right? So we should be very cautious in making proclamations about what will and won't happen. Today's vote, with a moon vote, of course, and the last aspect it's making is a trine to the part of fortune. This implies that there's like one last chance, one last saving grace here to be pulled out of the hat to save the situation. And it may or may not work, although theoretically the moon trining that part of fortune allows some success with that. Now the question, of course, becomes like who success for who, right? So when we're looking at the chart, if we look at Mercury ruling the protagonist, the person initiating the action, and the seventh house being the people, the antagonist, the people defending or resisting the action. The first house would be, we would assume, the house, that has started the impeachment trial. And Sagittarius on the seventh house would be the senators, especially the GOP senators, who are, clearly banded together and resisting. Now, Gemini and Sagittarius are both dual-bodied signs. So with Gemini and Sagittarius, you both have multiples of people. Now, here's what's interesting. I love the symbolism in astrology. Gemini rules the common man. So Gemini, typically when you see it, depending on what kind of information you're looking for in a chart and what it's telling you, one of its rulerships is pedestrians, the common man, the everyday neighborhood, everyday people. Sagittarius, on the other hand, rules large groups of people, of course, but it rules more elite groups, people who see themselves as better or superior to other people. So typically with Sagittarian people, what you'll often find is these are the people who are very good at knowing exactly where all the big exclusive hotspots are. They're very big about clubs. They love club memberships and they love belonging to clubs, which is a little bit different from Capricorn, but kind of on the same wavelength, right? Because it's this idea that while they see themselves, because it's half horse, half man, while Sagittarians see themselves as a man of the people, at the same time, they also see themselves as above that. So 1 foot in, 1 foot out sort of thing. But with Gemini, it's lateral, side to side, going from neighborhood and community and group, neighborhood and community and group, and, random people of all kinds. Sagittarius literally sees distinctions between the common man and who they are, and they see themselves as having risen from the common man, so they understand that, but they're still, special. Sagittarians are a lot of fun. They are a lot of fun, but they can also be a huge, gnarly pain in the butt because they really do have a high opinion of themselves, and they're very, very good at setting up cliques. So this absolutely sounds like the GOP Senate to me, right? Very cliquey, sense of superiority, elite groups or clubs. So we're going to assume that the first house in this vote chart for today is Gemini, with Mercury ruling it, and the senators, the GOP senators that we need the votes from, and as a body, of course, is going to be Sagittarius on the seventh house. Now, Mars is on that seventh house, so this is a lot of hot, aggressive activity. And interestingly, that moon that's making that trine to the part of fortune, both of these set up a trine previously, just not a couple days ago, to that Mars in the seventh house. So they got something they really wanted in the last 48 hours prior to now. But the question becomes, will it last? So if we look at their Mars, right? Well, what else is Mars doing? Because Mars is definitely impacting or symbolizing them. Well, Mars is squaring Neptune and it's squaring Venus. So Mars squaring Neptune indicates obviously a whole lot of empty promises and false delivery, also scandal, and a whole lot of closets, skeletons in the closets you get with this particular combination. Mars squaring Venus may indicate that this, whatever it is that they thought they were hiding or holding over somebody's head, it may come out in the open. One of the big things about not being held hostage to your secrets is getting out ahead of it. Because once it's out there, people can't hold it over your head. I mean, this is what Lev Parnas did, essentially, right? And I'm pretty sure it wasn't about protecting himself as much as it was about protecting his family. Because once he put all his stuff out there, everything he knew out there, there was nothing they could threaten his family, him, or his family with, right? They had no power. At that point, the only thing left was to go after him physically and specifically. So when you want to get out ahead of stuff, you put your stuff out there and just put it out there and get in front of it. And that way people can't hold it over your head. And I think that may be what's going to be coming up shortly when Mars approaches that Venus. And the timing would make sense because the moon, once it leaves Aries, because this is literally, it's not making any aspects except that trine to the part of fortune. The first aspect it makes next is a conjunction to Uranus, which is bombshell sort of confessions and exposés, as it were. So something's going to come tumbling out of the closet in a huge way. And whoever it is, whoever it belongs to, it's going to be very difficult to use that against them, or at least in ways it was intended. So it may hurt them, obviously, but it will be them hurting themselves rather than other people doing it. So, and this all involves the GOP. So it would be interesting to see who and what that is, if that is the case. Remember, I've never done impeachment charts before, so I could be wrong. You and I are going through this process together, or we're watching it unfold. So with that Mars, Venus, and Moon, Uranus aspects coming up, I would look for that literally, not now, but certainly within the next week, which is the exact week we're talking about, with this huge stuff like happening as far as this trial goes. So now Mercury rules the house and the people who've initiated the trial. Mercury is at 25 Aquarius. And this is okay. Like, we're good with that. Mercury is parallel the midheaven, gives it a nice strong position. Mercury is also, well, it's peregrine. It's not really doing anything useful in that respect. It does have some strength. Oh, right, aspects, sorry. The moon also just left a sextile to Mercury, so there may have been some compromise. I don't know that our Democratic or House representatives, not even Democrats, the House representatives, I'm not completely sure that they weren't also part of this negotiation. So they're getting something they wanted as well just recently. So it's interesting. I wish we had all the information. Clearly we don't. Now, with that said, Mercury is not really doing anything. It's just kind of hanging out, except that Mercury has just left a conjunction to the midheaven. So Mercury has planted its flag and made it stand, but this is the midheaven is the pinnacle of success, or the highest you can achieve. So the best that they can do, the strongest they can affect they can make, they have accomplished. And it may not seem like that to us. I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Also, too, Saturn co-rules the midheaven, and the Sun rules that fourth house. The Sun is approaching the midheaven, and Saturn is in its rulership, and both of these indicate the highest we can achieve, and also the end of the matter, as it were. So, as far as the vote today goes, what does this mean? Well, I think that this means, because Aquarius also is the common man and diverse groups of people. So I suspect that we may actually get the approval to get a witness in. And I'm even scared to say that, because you just know, it just feels like it's going to be a no. But even if it doesn't go through, I can promise you that within the next few days, it's all going to be moot point. It's all going to be null and void, because there's something much, much bigger about to land on the table that will make the whole need for witnesses maybe even not necessary. So let's see how it goes. And here's the final thought when we talk about astrology and how to use astrology. There are some things that seems like astrology can do, but can't, and we shouldn't. One of them is mind reading. It's very tempting to look at a chart and try to get inside the mind of someone to find out what their motivations or their thinking processes were. to make them choose a certain way or select whether they're going to jump in to the left or to the right or 5 feet high or 10 feet high. It's very tempting to do that. But the reality is that kind of fortune telling is not what astrology is intended for, which is why it was historically limited to people who were committed to being scholars and being responsible with the information that they're giving. Because fortune telling is very easy, and for people who are vulnerable, it's very, very persuasive in all the wrong ways, especially in the hands of irresponsible practitioners. The other thing that astrology doesn't necessarily do well is give us specifics. Like a classic example is people ask, well, what will I do for, my career in the future? Well, the fact of the matter is, we don't know, because we can only guess at what will be available in the future. Remember, Nostradamus saw a lot of stuff that he couldn't describe because it didn't exist in his time. So he had to use the best description he could. And we're still kind of guessing what it was that he saw, and that's kind of what it is, right? Computer software security stuff didn't exist until the last, couple of decades. So if you would ask, if somebody in the 1960s had asked what their child's future profession was going to be, it would have been very difficult to describe that as their profession because it didn't exist, right? How do you explain that when computers weren't even in homes at that point? So there's that. And, ultimately, this is really all about the evolution of things, right? How things are going to evolve and progress. So we know right here in the US, especially with this particular impeachment trial, you don't need to be an astrologer or a psychic or a soothsayer or a fortune teller to see the insult to our intelligence and the complete cavalier disregard for our humanity and what's considered fair, as it's being played out. Clearly there have always been a different set of rules for the rich versus the poor. And, we're aware of that. And one of the things about our Constitution is that we try to address that, because that's why this country was founded. But people are people, and it's an ongoing process to manage people and keep them from sinking to their lowest possible behaviors. And, we're kind of back in that place right now. So the opportunity to right the scales and do a course correction, get us back on the correct path forward for everyone's ability to thrive and benefit and do great things is certainly on the table right now. So will they vote for witnesses? Will they not? And you would think as an astrologer that we should be able to call that. And theoretically we could. If I wanted to put more time into it, I'm sure we could probably figure what the answer is. But I'm literally doing this off the cuff because it's 5 minutes of one. I'm trying to get this up and posted for you guys. And ultimately it doesn't really matter, because what really matters is that good, right things happen. And we already know how the impeachment is going to pan out, because the beginning of the impeachment process gives you the way the story ends. This chart, all this work we're doing right now, is specific to the trial itself. It does not give us the ultimate outcome for the impeachment itself. So when you are practicing astrology, my lovies, be mindful that you can't know everything and you're not going to know everything. And ultimately, it's not about being right. Ooh, I was right. It's not about that. It's about being able to make sense of why things are happening. That's where the real value of astrology is. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. All right, so let's see how the vote goes, crossing fingers, and let's see how the week goes, because it's definitely going to be an interesting one. All right.